Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CHARA Project. I'm Sarah, and this is Jenny and Heather. We are meeting with you this week on Zoom, as you know, we're practicing our social distancing here. I'm sure you understand, and probably are doing similar things yourself. And we are kicking off a brand new series. We're calling it Everyday CHARA. And with this, we are highlighting the CHARA essentials. And so each week we're going to highlight a new essential. The first one this week is going to be context. And what our hope is with Everyday CHARA is that these are just everyday tips and tricks that you can apply when you're reading your Bible every day. So when we look at context, the idea here is literary context, and we're trying to simply read around the passage to understand what it's saying. Jenny, you gave an example once that I loved. Jenny has 5 kids, and she talked about joining them in the middle of a movie and starting to ask all these questions because she didn't know what was going on. And they're like, "Mom, be quiet," but she was, she's missing all the context. And we do the same thing with the Bible. And so this week, today, we're going to just pick one verse and we're going to start to look at the context and show you what that looks like. So we picked Luke 6:38. I'm going to go ahead and read this verse. And it says, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." All right, girls, if we were to just read this one verse without looking at anything else, how do you think people might interpret this verse?
I give money, I get money.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the more I give, the happier I'm going to be.
Yeah.
Right. The more you're going to be given back.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. This verse has been used a lot to communicate exactly that, especially in a movement called the prosperity gospel. You may have heard of it as the health and wealth gospel. This idea is that that God, when you become a Christian, that God's desire is to reward you with health and wealth. And the more faithful you are, the more you're going to be given back in return. It is particularly, it can be very, very crushing for people who believe this. And if you're going, if you're fighting cancer, or if you're persecuted, or if your parents just passed away because of the coronavirus, right? And you believed that I did everything right. I have strong faith. It's going to cause you to question your faith. Was my faith enough? Does God love me as much as that person who didn't pass away, who's not being persecuted? And it can be very, very crushing. And for Christianity to be true, it has to be true everywhere. And for the Bible, for our interpretation within the Bible, it has to hold without the rest of the Bible. And so what we're going to do now with this verse is we're going to look at the passages right before it and right after it to see if that interpretation would be true, because the Bible cannot contradict itself. Okay, Jenny, do you want to set us up? Start reading in Luke 6:36.
Yep. Here we go. "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." You want me to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and read. Let's go ahead and start reading in verse 41 again.
Okay. "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye,' when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Man, I love all these examples.
Right?
I have a whole list of examples here, and it doesn't just isolate the one passage about giving.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
What's great about this, Jen, also though, is if you look beyond these verses that are obviously looking at judging and forgiveness and all these other pieces, if you go up to verse 27 and kind of read the passage even before this, it says, "Love your enemies." Verse 31 says, "Do to others as you would have them do to you," the golden rule. Or verse 35 says, "Love your enemies" again, and then says, "Lend to them without expecting anything back." So all of a sudden we're seeing that it has a lot more to do than just with giving money, which I think is how we were originally interpreting this. It has a lot more to do with all the things. When it comes to forgiveness, when it comes to mercy, when it comes to judging, we have to be willing that if we're going to give something out, we're going to get it back in return. This is a totally changing the dynamic of this passage.
It is. I think we hear the word give, like in verse 38 there, and we automatically think money. But in the context that you gals just read, it's not talking about money. So this verse is sandwiched right in between this talk about, not judging and not condemning others, and then, not being a hypocrite, and when you have the beam in your own eye and condemning someone with a speck in theirs. And so it really makes you start to question, what does give mean, and what is it talking about? And Heather, I think you hit on it right there. I mean, it's a lot about this golden rule. And so from here, the next step would be, so we just looked at the immediate context within the book itself. And from here, we would want to start working our way out throughout the rest of the Bible. Now, fortunately for us, we are actually reading the Sermon on the Mount in Luke. Now, Matthew also records the Sermon on the Mount. And I know this, my study notes kind of point me to this. Some of the language is familiar. So if you were to turn to Matthew 5-7, I'll just read 2 verses out of Matthew 7, the first 2 verses. Do not judge so that you won't be judged, for you will be judged by the same standard with which you judge others, and you will be measured by the same measure you use. And then it goes right back into the example of, why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye and not notice the beam in the wood in your own eye? So this language, if you were to compare Matthew 7 and Luke 6:38, very, very similar language, right? Hey, if you're going to judge, you're going to be judged with the same measure back. And so folks, I hope this gives some clarity to what this passage, what Jesus was saying and what Jesus was not saying. And if you join us this week, we'll have this Bible study online and also in our social media posts, but we'll get even a better understanding of what Jesus was saying here. And really hopefully be able to walk away with why context is so, so important. Girls, do you have anything you want to add before we sign off?
I was just going to agree with you and say how important context is, and how crazy our beliefs can get if we just extract one verse out of the middle of a passage.
Yeah,
So.
it's why it's one of my first go-to study tips. When I think about when I'm opening my Bible for the first time, to study a passage in the morning, the first thing I do is look at the verses before and below it as a good starting spot when studying the Bible. Seems like the easiest and also the most impactful in my study.
I agree. I love that. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next week as we look at the history and why that is so important in understanding a passage. See you next week.